Now let's look at some scatter brushes. In my brushes palette at the bottom left-hand side, I'll open up the library, we'll choose decorative, and let's open some of the pre-made, predefined decorative scatter brushes. Notice that each one of these is their own object. If I click and drag these objects onto here, you can see exactly what it looks like, but that's not the brush in itself. A scatter brush allows you to take whatever object or group of objects that you have, and it will scatter them about a line that you draw. So I'm going to delete that away. This time I'm going to click on the object again, and you can see it's been added to my brushes palette. Now with my brush tool, I can click and drag a line, and you can see that line will draw off that particular style. Now since I have a fill color selected, that's why it's filled in with black, so I'm going to turn that off. But this is the essence of what a scatter brush allows you to do. You can take an object, let's do the sun, and it will scatter that object, changing either the size, the rotation, and even the amount of scatter based on the line that you drew. Let's choose another one. In this case, I've got some bubbles that I've selected. It doesn't have to be one object, it can be multiple objects. I can click and drag and very, very quickly fill in an entire area with a repeating pattern or repeating object over and over again. So this sure beats having to copy and paste things, and it gives you a lot more control over what you create. So let's create our first scatter brush. Let's delete all these away. I've given you a variety of textures to work with and some shapes, and you'll see what we'll do with each of these in a little bit. By default, you generally want to start with a simple shape, so we'll do a star first. With the star, let's change the color of the star to something a little more interesting. We'll make it green. There we go. Now, you can make the star any size that you need, but I try to keep my shapes the same size that I want their final product to be. If it's too large, then the lines you create, the stars are going to be too large. So this tends to be a pretty good size for now. Let's close out this. With the object selected, in the very bottom right-hand corner of brushes, we're going to make a new brush. You can see scatter brush is now one of my options. When I say OK, this will give me my scatter brush options to work with. Now there's a lot of different things we can change up within these options, but one thing we don't have is a preview of how it will look. Instead, we just see the preview of the object that we have selected. So to give myself a preview, when I first create this brush, I'm going to give it a name. We're going to call it Ben's Star Brush. I'm going to say OK and just commit to creating that new brush. Now I can choose my brush tool. When I click and drag a line, I can see what my line of my brush will look like. Be sure that there's no fill turned on. That's why that was filled in. And this is what my basic scatter star brush is. All it's going to do is just repeat that star over and over and over again. Now let's start customizing how that star will look. I'm going to double click on my star again. Now I've got a preview of any changes that I have to make. This includes sizing, spacing, rotation, scatter, anything that I want it to do. I've got preview checked off. From here, let's see what sizing will allow me to do. I can have a fixed size of making it smaller or even larger to overlap, or I can set it to be a random size, making some of them be a lot smaller and some of them be a lot larger. Notice that when I have a random chosen, I've got two different sliders. One is a minimum size and one is a maximum size. So this will choose to set the size of my star to be roughly 50% to 100%. And it's completely random. Other things will allow you to change it based on the pressure and based on whatever Wacom tablet that you have. But for now, I'm going to keep it like this. So I've got some small and some large stars that I can work from here. Spacing simply means I can make them closer or farther apart, and I can set that to be random as well. Scattering means it'll go from one side of the line or the other side. This is one where you may want to have it set to random so it'll scatter from both sides of the line. There we go. And then finally, rotation will allow you to rotate whatever object that you have. Again, I like to set this to random so I can rotate it one way or the other based on whatever I like. All right, that all looks good. We'll say OK to that. We'll apply it to the stroke. Now I've got my star line selected. So when I paint, I can quickly and easily fill in a night sky with stars. But there's one more thing I want to do. Right now I've got my fill color or my stroke color set to green. And so it's going to make green stars. But what happens if I change it to red? I've got red loaded up now. I'm going to click and drag. Notice that my stars are still green. The reason why is because it's keeping the same color of the object. I want to be able to change the color of the object. So let's erase these away again. I'm going to draw off a preview line and then double click on my scatter brush that I created. Notice at the very bottom, my colorization method is set to none. This means it's only going to keep the key color that the object originally is, in this case green. What I want to do is to change the color based on whatever I have selected. And there's a couple of different ways of doing it. You can change either the tints and shades, or you can completely shift the hue, the color that you have. And that's what we want to do with this one. With hue shift selected, now my color will shift to whatever selected color I had, in this case red. So when I say OK, we'll do apply to stroke. Now I can paint red stars, and then I can change up to, say, a blue color, and then start painting blue stars on top of this as well. The colorization method is very, very important to keep in mind whenever you create any kind of brush. You want to be able to shift it from one hue to the next thing. A more artistic thing you can do with a scatter brush is to create a crosshatch style brush. So with this, I've given you a variety of different crosshatch pre-vectorized little pencil marks that you can create. With this one, let's select this first one. I'm going to make a new scatter brush. We'll say OK. And remember, the first time we're going to do it, we're just going to say OK to it. And that'll give us our new brush that we've created. Let's set my fill to none and my stroke to black. Now when I draw with this brush, this is what the default looks like. A good crosshatch brush has the lines going in different directions and maybe even has them overlapping, giving a different density to the lines that we've created. So with that line selected, I'm going to double click on my brush, open up my options. I've got preview turned on. Now I can play around with the sizing and the scattering and rotation of the lines that I have. I'm going to set the size to be random. We'll have some smaller sizes and some larger sizes. That looks good. The spacing definitely needs to be a lot closer together. I'm not going to randomize that, but I do want it to be nice and scattered, maybe having some getting off the line, some closer to the line. And the rotation, of course, needs to be randomized as well, having some going different ways and some going others. Very good. Let's maybe let the spacing be a little bit closer. Now it's starting to look a lot more like a true crosshatch kind of feel. When I say OK, we'll apply it to the stroke, and now I've got a crosshatch brush. So if I wanted to do a style of drawing that looked crosshatch, but I wanted to do in vector, I've got a brush that allows me to mimic and recreate that kind of feel. Doing this to a variety of different crosshatch styles will give you a different kind of result. And if I wanted to, I could quickly and easily select these lines and change it to a different style, just playing around with it. The final thing to remember is that you can also change the width of it. If you look at the very top, you can see the stroke is set to 1 point. Well, it's not really 1 point, it's at 100%. So if I needed it to be half the size, I could set it to half a point, and now my strokes will resize themselves to be half that size as well. Playing around with this is another thing you can do with your brushes. So for the second exercise, I want you to create a custom scatter brush that uses each one of these cross-hatching techniques.